Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Conversation of Power. In today's conversation, we are continue to discuss one of the most important development in Northeast Asia about Japan's snap elections and its results. Now there is a female prime minister in Japan, and on the result of snap elections, she landslidely and decisively won the elections. And of course, Japan's in the region one of the maybe the second most powerful country in Northeast Asia, following China. And definitely it will have some consequences for regional balances of power, and maybe even Japan's global relations. There will be some effects. And to understand these effects in details, I'm today joining by Dr. Taku Tamaki. He's a lecturer in international relations in the Department of Politics, History, and International Relations in the School of Social, Political, and Geographical Science at Loughborough University in United Kingdom. Welcome, Dr. Taku. Thank you for joining me and spare your time come to here.
Thank you very much for having me on the program.
You're welcome. And before just joining the show, starting the show, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell for our upcoming live streams. Our channel is fastly growing, and we are on our way to become a powerhouse of geopolitics and international relations. Please join our growing community. And Dr. Tamaki, just let me start with my first questions. Could you start by giving us an overview about the background of Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's political and especially how she rose to power as a Japanese first Prime Minister in October 2025?
Yes. As it's been reported in the media for quite some time now, she is a protege of the late former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. She does share quite a bit of his national security concerns about the regional balance of power, China's rise, as well as being a social conservative. Similarities with him in terms of how she thinks of the current constitution as needing some kind of an amendment, as well as she's a social conservative in the sense that she is against same-sex marriage. She is against women when they marry for the partners to have different surnames. Her growth to power is her ascendancy to power is a very interesting one. She became an LDP candidate for the Diet back in the time of Prime Minister Koizumi. At the time of his postal reforms, Takaichi was sent in as an assassin to compete against LDP members who were against the political reform. So she has that. She was sent in, but before that, she also had a few stints in the Diet. So she's not completely new. And ever since she's became a member of the Diet for LDP, she's been involved in policy research. For instance, she has been the chair of the LDP's Policy Research Council. So she, I think, does seem to have a very good grasp of policies. She's been involved in things like cybersecurity, as well as land reforms to prevent, say, foreign interest from buying up security-sensitive lands and so forth. So she's been involved in the policy. So looks like she's a very good candidate to be a prime minister. What actually made her prime minister? What sort of made her sort of really popular, as we've seen in the elections? I think it's just a matter. It's just the fact that she has become the first woman, the female prime minister, 4 months ago, and since then her popularity ratings have been very, very high. So I think the sheer fact that sort of the visual of having a first female prime minister, she doesn't mince her words. So that might be part of the of her popularity. And I think she took a gamble in calling this snap election, and I think that gamble paid off.
And what factors do you think contributed most to her decision to call up a snap elections just months after taking office? And how did that gamble play out in the February 2026 vote?
I think the gamble played out very well for her. I think she was vindicated. There were some calls, some commentators, and I suppose from within the party as well, said, "Well, this is reckless," but it seems to have paid off very well. She must have read the room very well, as very well too. Um, and I think in terms of the policies, it's one of the things about the Takaichi administration is that we haven't really had much in the way of policy debates in the run-up to the election. Election is the campaign itself was very short too, so there wasn't much space for policy debates. So we don't really know what her policies are. We sort of know she wants to lower the consumption tax on food. She has called on the National Congress to discuss that, as well as the constitutional reform. Though it's not just her pet project; it's been the project for the LDP since its founding in 1955 as well, and most probably the very recent Sino-Japanese spat. I think that might have also galvanized her support base. But it looks like she was able to say the things that voters wanted to hear, lowering of the consumption tax, growing the economy by lowering taxation, inducing demand, so on and so on. So I think she was able to read the room very well, and that must have galvanized not so much the support base, but basically the floating voters who wanted to see and hear things that were different from the status quo.
And in light of the Liberal Democrat Party's landslide victory, so what kind of mandate does she give? This give Prime Minister Takaichi for pushing her agenda forward?
Well, it gives her a great mandate, two-thirds majority in the lower house. So she hasn't quite reached the majority in the upper house. So it's going to have that sort of disconnect over the next couple of years until the next upper house elections. Having said that, having a two-thirds majority in the lower house means that she can override, or her party can override the upper house decision. So she pretty much has, she really is good at galvanizing support from within the party base. Then, she has quite a bit of mandate in potentially being able to push through a lot of things that she wants to push through. So she does have the capital, political capital now. So I think we're watching at the moment how she goes about using that political capital.
And could you a little bit explain her views on revising Japan's pacifist constitution and why she sees it necessary given current security concerns in the region?
I think it's mainly to do with the fact that Japan, from her perspective, and I suppose from the mainstream conservative perspectives within the LDP, that the constitution unnecessarily ties the hands of Japan's defense posture. Japan wants to enhance its security commitment, alliance commitment with the US. Japan is concerned about the rise of China, what China is doing in the South China Sea, in East China Sea. This whole thing about Taiwan, even when the People's Liberation Army is ready, as it were, to liberate the island, so forth and so on. So looking at the security dynamics, the geopolitical dynamics within the region, conservatives like Takaichi wants Japan to be able to enhance its military spending, to be able to, as they say, to be able to protect the lives of the people rather than protecting what the Constitution says. What they usually come up with is, well, you have a choice whether to uphold the Constitution on the one hand or to protect the lives of the people. And if what Constitution says and what they think as the, how should I say, the imperative of saving people's lives and property, how are you going to choose? Do we have to end up debating this? So they say, well, what we need is a constitutional change so that we can enhance the security of our people and our property. So what she is trying to do is not necessarily a militarist in nature per se. I think what she is trying to do is for Japan to play a more an enhanced military as well as political diplomatic role in terms of being a middle power.
And in your observation, how has Takaichi tough sentence on China and potential involvement in the Taiwan issues shaped the public opinion in Japan, and what risk does that pose? Because now there is a landslide victory, and on the other hand, there is a growing Chinese threat. How she will be able to manage?
I think the first thing that is important to point is we have seen a lot of reporting by the Western media about she is an ultra hawk, she has provoked China, but there have been quite a bit of pushback from, say, within social media, some of the policy experts about, what do you mean that she's an ultra, super hawk, she's an ultra conservative, who are we actually uh, comparing against? If you compare her to Shinzo Abe, she is not that much of a difference. I mean, she is a protege. She does think Abe as her mentor. So many of the policies, many of the stance, I think is very similar. And again, some of the international media reporting on how Takaichi provoked China. I don't think it's the case that Takaichi provoked China. It's just that the China decided to be provoked by what she said. In terms of Taiwan, what she said about Taiwan is very much, it's nothing new per se. It's the sort of things that strategists, more policymakers, and policy analysts would agree on, that if there is an armed conflict between US and China, Japan will get involved simply because it's in alliance with the United States. If there's a blockade around Taiwan, it is going to affect Japan because Japan is also dependent on the sea lines of communication. If there's a blockade, well, it could potentially become an existential issue for Japan as well. And if China does decide to retaliate against the United States because of an armed conflict, one of the places that will be hit are the US bases on Japan. So what she said, in a sense, is nothing new. There's nothing controversial about that. If anything, it is just that she said it in a parliamentary committee meeting. So that, I think, might have given the Chinese side this sort of narrative about how Japan is provoking China, or that how Japan is ready to take military action if something happens in Taiwan. What I think the reality is, of course, now, having said that, there is this tension. It is not going away. On the one hand, Takaichi seems to have gained the mandate. It doesn't sound as if she is going to take a sort of a more tougher stance against China, or tougher stance against China per se. She's so far sounding very pragmatic about her policies. So she wants to maintain this strategic relationship that is mutually beneficial for Japan and China. So it's really a continuation of what Abe was pushing for. And in terms of maintaining the alliance structure and Japan playing its part in the Indo-Pacific, again, is very much a familiar narrative. And in terms of reaching out to the neighbors, she has said that she is not sending cabinet members to the Takeshima Day Memorial later in the month, which is, again, a very pragmatic thing to do. There's not, I think, anybody who wants to have, wants to consider balancing against China would want to maintain good relations with South Korea. And indeed, some of the latest news is that it seems like Takaichi might be visiting South Korea in March. So far, so pragmatic. What does it mean for balance of power? I think we just have to see what her policies are going to be.
And just as a small comment, Taco, uh, as you said, in the social media, they painting maybe the different the picture than the reality in Japan. You know, in social media, they paint headlines. There is a right wing prime minister rise on the power, and provoke the China. So, do you say that she already won and get this success based on an existential reality on the region?
Has she won? It's an interesting question because, uh, as far as if you think about what the Chinese, the Communist Party was saying about the Takaichi warning about her militarism and all that, it didn't change much. If anything, it gave Takaichi the mandate, and that's one of the ways of looking at it. Whether going forward, I don't know. My concern is that it might end up being a game of chicken, where China keeps on ratcheting up its narrative. Takaichi stands firm, and unless Takaichi makes a misstep, I think the lesson here effectively is Takaichi needs to be a little bit careful about what she says in public, not to sort of give fodder to the Chinese Communist Party. But I don't think she's going to change her stance as such. She fully understands that Japan's defense needs U.S. Nuclear umbrella, and I think what she's trying to do, she's trying to work for that. So, yes, it will be a very difficult sort of balancing act for her. Again, she needs to be very careful about not unnecessarily antagonizing the Chinese. To be pragmatic, I think, is the way forward. So, in terms of balance of power shifting, I think to the extent that she is very much carrying what Abe was doing in forging strategic partnerships with other middle powers in the Indo-Pacific and beyond, is she's capable of carrying ahead with that. It might less be about sort of shifting the balance of power per se on her own, as it is more about forging enhanced strategic partnerships with other powers and trying to sort of stake out a position as middle power.
And what are the key elements of Sananomics, her economic strategy, and how does it aim to reduce Japan's dependence on China through partnership with countries like India and Vietnam, and even maybe United States or Southeast Asian countries as well?
Yes, I think it's one of those $1 million questions, right? If we knew everything, none of us would be here with making a killing in the stock markets. One of the things about her, especially in the run-up to the election, is that was very thin on details. And we are still, I think, waiting for the details to emerge. Some of the headline things, as I mentioned earlier, the lowering of consumption tax on food, for instance, or about increasing spending while bringing the taxes down. Um, I'm not an economist. I cannot fully say for certain, but as some commentators were saying prior to the election, it sort of carries a risk of what might have happened with the UK when Liz Truss was the prime minister. So there have been talk about, okay, if certain Takaichi goes ahead with lowering of taxes, and then splurge on spending, it could mean a selling of the yen. But it hasn't happened yet. The stock market is in rude health. The yen has recovered somewhat. The bond market, maybe yes, but it's not quite a sell-off that some people were speculating at first. So again, it's very difficult to see at the moment because we don't really have the fullest indication of what exactly she wants to do. It's going to take a little while, I think, for the fuller picture to emerge. But if there is an element of supply side economics, there might be that. Again, I think the markets, the investors are looking out for exactly that. So I think The markets are waiting to see what the details might be, and I'm sure they will start emerging in the next month, in the upcoming months.
And just interesting question come to my mind. I think in previous China's most recent sanctions, they target to the LDP's the vote ground. I think to maybe target the Sanae Takaichi's elections, but it turned out that she won the elections decisively. How this turned out in favor of Sanae Takaichi?
In terms of, do you mean in terms of you had Japan-China relations, economic relations, or?
Yes, the just the last sections, I think the China targets some the LDPs, like the seafood and these
Mhm.
cities. I think just the pro LDP cities in terms of the seafood.
Um, China is well versed in these, pressure tactics. So I'm sure they'll find lots of things, seafood you mentioned, and other sort of pressure points. I think the Chinese are more capable of doing it than Japan per se. So we'll see in terms of how far this goes. But I think in terms of simply adding pressure and um, pressure on Japanese economy, I think the Chinese, I think, will keep on doing it for a while. But again, this election has been done. Takaichi enjoys very high support. She has the two-thirds majority. There's not much the Chinese can do in terms of effecting an outcome. The only way for that to happen is for Takaichi to step back and quote unquote admit that she was wrong, which is something she will never do. So again, there is an element of game of chicken playing out, but also another thing that we need to be mindful, of course, in this Sino-Japanese tensions is the role of Trump administration. So he'll be visiting China in April. I think the Japanese, I wouldn't be surprised if the Japanese officials are paying very close attention to that and doing something in the background. I think he's trying to sort of read what Trump might say because that might have an effect. But again, it's very early days when we're not hearing much. So I think this quid pro quo between China and Japan will continue for some time. Some commentators say, well, eventually, as when the Chinese Communist Party realizes that they can't really do much, they might pretend to forget about it come November, but we don't know.
And just a little bit go to the more details from your perspective. How might Takaichi's victory will affect the Sino-Japanese relations, especially with the Beijing's economic coercion tactics?
It's it's a very interesting question. Um, Again, I don't think Takaichi will climb down. On whether and to what extent Takaichi can sort of encourage the U.S. administration to nudge China into climbing down, how ready Xi Jinping is to climb down himself. There's so many variables at the moment, which is very difficult. But if this pressure, if these pressures keep on mounting, the businesses will start to lobby the government. Many manufacturers are concerned about potentially the supply chain drying up if this keeps on going. So again, there will be quite a bit of domestic um, lobbying. So I guess it's very difficult at this point to see how exactly things are going to pan out. It's very early days. Takaichi has been very pragmatic. She has so far managed to not to say anything careless about China. She's taking a very pragmatic approach. So hopefully there is some toing and froing in the background. But again, you are looking at Takaichi with her support She's not going to back down. Xi Jinping likely is not going to back down. So there needs to be some kind of an incentive. And part of that might be about what role the Trump administration might play in this. But again, that's another extra variable for us to be looking out for.
And what implications does her leadership have for the US-Japan alliance, particularly in terms of defense cooperation and deterrence in Northeast Asia or in wider Indo-Pacific region?
Yes, I think they're both good news and bad news. The good news is that she's a nationalist like Trump. They're on similar pages. They seem to, their ideas resonate well with one another. Trump did endorse Takaichi in the run-up to the vote, which was unprecedented. Um, and as a protege of Abe, and Trump does, interestingly enough, he does speak very highly of Shinzo Abe. So, and if you remember last April when he was talking, when Trump unveiled his Liberation Day tariffs, he did mention Abe. So Abe could be like the bridge between Takaichi on the one hand with Trump on the other, and it might actually work quite well. And Takaichi is very well aware of Japan's need for US nuclear umbrella. She is intent on strengthening the alliance commitment with the United States, and she is working to make the $550 billion investment pledge work. So far, I think what Takaichi is trying to do is to please the Trump administration. Although, having said that, some commentators are beginning to say that the more Takaichi seem to be causing up to Trump, and if some people see the 550 billion as not so much an investment pledge, but sort of a price, then some people might begin to have doubts about her. But again, we need to see. So if those are the good news, then the bad news is, of course, Trump. Trump being Trump, we don't really know. Having pledged 550 billion doesn't necessarily mean he will tomorrow wake up and say, well, we need more from Japan. What are we doing in the Asia Pacific, so forth and so on. And of course, there's in Trump's April visit to China coming up. The fear, of course, as it's been stated by commentators, we don't really know what kind of agreement Trump will have with Xi. I suppose the fear is that they might make some kind of an agreement behind Japan's back or everybody else's back. So who knows what the discussions are going to entail? Would it entail Taiwan as well? Big question mark. So I think the bottom line is that I think Takaichi feels that she needs to make sure that she keeps Trump on her side. And I think she is in a good position to do so, again, for the reasons I mentioned in terms of the good news element of Takaichi premiership. And I think Takaichi will do her best to try to maintain US and Trump's interest in this part of the Indo-Pacific. But this will likely come with another hefty price tag, and I think Takaichi needs to manage that very well, how to sell that to the Japanese public.
And just connecting the dots, will there be any concern in the Takaichi's administrations of the US possible withdrawal from Japan, or is there any connection between the semiconductor investments in Hokkaido, or there is a link between these investments in semiconductor to the Taiwan contingency, or the US withdrawing its forces from Japan, or increase the budget, because the semiconductors or the chips, as you know, in many ways they can affect to the defense as well.
Yes, I think those are the concerns. Just as the European allies are worrying about US commitment in the region, I think it's an ongoing issue in this part of the Asia Pacific / the Indo-Pacific as well. We've seen with South Korea under Trump 1.0, the connection between trade and security. We've seen it again in 2.0. So these narratives, I think these ideas are something I'm sure Takaichi and the Japanese government in general, officials in general, are concerned about. And I think that is why Takaichi is keen on delivering this $550 billion investment pledge. And I'm sure they are bracing for further demands from the Trump administration. In terms of the computer chips like TMSC, and as mentioned, Hokkaido investment in Hokkaido, TMSC is enhancing its presence in Kyushu and Kumamoto Prefecture as well. From the Japanese perspective, it's a good news that Taiwan is doing this, but of course, I'm sure the government is looking very closely at what Trump will do vis-a-vis Taiwan or vis-a-vis China as well. Some of the latest news is that Taiwan has agreed on some trade deal with the United States. I'm not too sure to what extent this will affect Taiwanese investments in Japan, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Japanese government is keen on maintaining Taiwanese investments. I mean, that sort of provides a hedge against US completely walking away per se, but there's so many pieces that we're still looking that still needs to sort of emerge to be clarified. I think it's very difficult to sort of see what exactly how this is going to pan out. But this concern about U.S. withdrawal from commitments, I think it's real. It's something that Japan has been talking about. Even Shinzo Abe himself mentioned this. The moment Japan shows any reluctance to come to the help of the United States, the alliance is dead. If the US shows any reluctance to say anything about this commitment, most probably the alliance is dead. And I think Takaichi shares that view. So I think she will do her best to try to placate Trump administration. But again, that would most probably come with a hefty price tag.
And how do you see Takaichi's rise will altering the power balance in Northeast Asia, East Asia, or wider Indo-Pacific, especially regarding the middle powers and potential emulation of her political model?
I think it is not as, again, if you sort of buy into this sort of narrative that Takaichi had provoked China, she is an ultra-nationalist, then you begin to sort of ask, okay, how is Japan going to change the status quo? I don't think that is the case. I think Takaichi has been very pragmatic so far. Again, it's very early days of her newly gained mandate, but she has done, she has played her hands very well. So far, so very pragmatic, repeating pretty much what the prior LDP administrations have been saying. So it is less about a very, how should I say, short-term balance of power. It might be a good sort of, so her policies and her ability to implement policies, like again, enhancing Japan's alliance commitment with the United States, or perhaps, again, well, amending the constitution might be some way down the road. I mean, you still have, she still has to win the upper house elections, and then there needs to be a full sort of consultation, and then need to be put to referendum, which is a very high hurdle in a sense. So constitutional amendment is some way down the road. So it's not something that is going to happen tomorrow. If anything, it's not an abrupt change in balance of power. It might be more gradual, and it's less about Japan sort of leading the way per se, although Japan, I think, is capable of playing a very good taking initiatives in making the change possible. But just as under Abe administration, it's less about Japan leading the pack as such as it is really about forging and enhancing strategic partnerships with middle powers, with the UK, with other European partners, and of course the regional powers like India, Australia, and then perhaps reaching out to perhaps other middle powers and smaller powers in Southeast Asia. And if again, Takaichi plays her hand very well, if her ideology doesn't get in the way, then she does have a potential of canvassing opinions and indeed building up the coalition or the partnerships that might be necessary not so much to drastically change the balance of power, but to gradually shift. Almost as if to sort of suggest that what Mark Carney said back in Davos, Japan might actually be in a very good position to be playing a significant role in that process if that's the sort of direction that middle powers will be taking.
And in these circumstances, just most recently, Japan, there is a growing relations between South Korea and Japan. How it will continue under Takaichi? Will you have any comment about this?
I wish that Takaichi can maintain a very pragmatic relationship with the Lee administration. I think that jamming session, I think, was a very good one. I'm glad to hear that she is not sending cabinet members to the Takeshima Memorial Day. I think on the February the 22nd. As I said, this is one of the latest news is that she'll be visiting South Korea in March. So the signals, we're getting good signals. Again, if Takaichi can maintain her pragmatism, then I think there's a very good chance that Japan-South Korea relations could improve going forward. Again, it's all to do with whether she can keep her ideology at bay, some of her instincts, like visiting Yasukuni. Whether she has mentioned that she'll work with her allies and neighbors to gain support for her visiting Yasukuni. Again, we don't really know what she actually meant by that. Whether she thinks she's able to balance maintaining good relations with South Korea on the one hand and then yet go to Yasukuni, I'm not too sure if that would work. But again, I'm hoping that her pragmatism wins, and so long as her ideology doesn't get in the way, then I'm hoping that this good relationship can be maintained. And this goes not just for South Korea as well, but for other East and especially Southeast Asian neighbors too.
And could you a little bit discuss, will there be any global financial ramification of her policies, such as impacts on bond, the yen, and investor confidence?
I think it's hard to see. I think it really depends on her fiscal policies and how, especially the bond markets, would react. The yield curve is still very sharp, still steep. So again, it really depends on what the investors think. If there is a massive sell-off of yen assets, then it might affect other bond markets. But I don't really know. I'm not really a specialist on finance. But so far, what some of the investors were saying about, this could mean, investors selling the bonds, the stocks, the yen. It hasn't quite happened. As I said, the stock market is doing extremely well. The yen as well has regained somewhat. So it is not that some of the sort of worst case scenarios haven't materialized yet. And I think much of it rides on the actual details. If investors think that Takaichi is repeating the mistakes of Liz Truss, then it might precipitate a massive sell-off. It would have a repercussion in the rest of the financial markets. But at the moment, we're not seeing that again. And I'm sure the investors are keeping a very close eye on what the details, the granularities of her fiscal policies will be.
And finally, what warnings should the world take from Japan's shift under Sanae Takaichi in terms of the escalating tensions in the region between China and Japan and broader geopolitical landscape in East Asia?
Again, I think it's worth remembering that the current tension is less about Takaichi provoking China as it is about China being sort of deciding to be provoked by it. And again, not everyone in East Asia is buying into the Chinese Communist Party narrative as such. So it's not as if Takaichi all of a sudden said, okay, we're going to go gung-ho. That's not what she seems. She's very pragmatic. So in that sense, it is not as if we are seeing a rise of an ultra-nationalist, ultra-conservative, ultra-militarist Japan trying to upset the balance of power. As I said, it's more along the lines of Takaichi carrying on the mantle of Shinzo Abe, continuing with his policies and maintaining what they think is the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. So it is less about what Takaichi, as an ultra-conservative, trying to do. But as you insinuate, there is that reality of rising tensions. It's going to, I think, the temperature is going to remain high for the time to come. And one of the worries, of course, is that neither side is trying to sort of find an off-ramp for this. And whether the US will be able to play that role, I am not too sure. Again, everything rides on what Trump agrees with Xi Jinping. So in that sense, the rising tensions, how long this will continue, again, is a worry. Whether this will develop into something more serious, I hope not. Again, if Takaichi can maintain her calm, and if she can maintain her pragmatism, and if she can keep Trump on her side, or at least have the ears of Trump, then I'm not too sure if we will be entering into a very sort of dangerous situation in the Indo-Pacific. But in terms of, if you think about the balance of power, not so much in a bad way, everything deteriorating, but, Japan playing more of taking more initiatives, forging strategic partnerships, reassuring Southeast Asian states that, they don't necessarily have to worry about US or China, that, so forging strategic partnerships with Japan is a way forward as a small or middle power. Maybe in that sense, she might be able to to take initiatives and to sort of carry on Abe's taking of initiatives in forging strategic partnerships. And just as it remains the case in the Euro-Atlantic, this sort of precarious balance, and especially the role played by the Trump administration, I think the Japanese government is very well aware of the precarious balance that we're living in right now. So not too sure. I think, if, again, as I've been saying all along, if Takaichi can maintain her pragmatism, then hopefully this tension between China and Japan will subside at some point. Not, where I don't think we're talking about weeks or months. I think we will be talking about in a sort of a longer time span, and hopefully. Again, if Takaichi is very careful with her words going forward, and hoping that it won't deteriorate too much.
I just asked too many questions about the security. Just let me ask one final questions about the what kind of the positive message and implications Japan's will send toward the world under the Takaichi administrations, because the many part of the world, they remember Japan's with their infrastructure, with the educational sport, with the sport in health. In many ways, Japan's always remember with it is good brands like Toyota, like Nikon, like many others just come to my mind. How the world can see the Japan in next 5 or 10 years?
It's an interesting question. I think it's to do with her mandate, that she is able to implement policies. And I think if she can shed some of the worst instincts, some of the narratives about foreigners, quote unquote, again, if she can move away from that and to really focus minds and to be able to implement policies that will kickstart Japanese economy, then I think she can show the world that you don't have to necessarily buy wholeheartedly to populist narratives. You can actually provide safeguards, and Abe himself was very interested in in providing safeguards. So Again, if
Is it
you
possible? Is it possible to say during the Abe administration, Japan has more powerful soft power image on the world?
I think he was successful in that sense. I think one of the things about the foreigner problem that the Japanese like to talk about is about over tourism, and that, in a sense, is a reflection of Japan's soft power. That people have good images of Japan. People want to experience Japan, what Japan has to offer, whether it be technology, whether it be food, whether it's simply enjoying what Japanese like to sort of think of in terms of the juxtaposition of modernity with tradition. So modern, urban sort of landscape that you might imagine of Tokyo on the one hand, with the temples and other traditional historical structures that you see in places like Kyoto, for instance. I think Japan has been successful in that, and I think that is showing up in the numbers. Um, so there's a lot riding for Takaichi if she plays her hands very well. If ideology doesn't get too much of her, and she is able to convince the markets that her policies will work, and indeed, if she is really capable of sort of refloating Japanese economy, as it were, then yes, I think that itself shows that this approach is possible to the rest of the world. But again, it's very early days, and we haven't really seen much in terms of the details. So I think we're sort of looking very carefully at what Takaichi will be saying in the coming weeks and months.
Now I have several questions from my audience. So just let me bring on the screen. Yeah, this is from Sarah. I think they're from Takaichi. Tao's stance on China is bold. Reducing economic dependence through ties with India and Vietnam sounds smart, but could it escalate trade wars? I'm not sure what kind of trade wars, maybe between China and Japan.
It's an interesting one, and I think it's a good point. Takaichi has always been calling, in a way, for Japan not to depend on everything on China. She said, she would say, well, it's not as if you cannot have supply chains from reaching out to China, but she has been not so much skeptical, but she has been ringing warning bells about Japanese businesses being too dependent on China, almost 100% of their supply chains and production. She said, look, strategically speaking, that is not wise, and we have to sort of hedge. And if that were the case, and again, if Takaichi has her way, then, and if she's able to convince the businesses, maybe that might mean enhancing economic relations with Vietnam or India or elsewhere as well, and other parts of Southeast Asia. Whether that would then prompt the Chinese to, again, increase pressure on Japan, who knows? It might happen. Or it might actually give the Chinese a semblance of an off-ramp to say that, look, we need to be pragmatic. Again, we don't know. But in terms of enhancing Japan's economic relations or partnership with India or Vietnam or other parts of Southeast Asia, there is a possibility. And again, this is all tied in with Takaichi's worries about being dependent too much on China, and again, balancing away from that. And if she's capable of implementing policies that businesses and investors like, then that might be one of the things that might happen.
Okay, just from Maria. Sananomics seems promising for boosting Japan's economy, but those tax cuts have markets nervous. How will this affect the yen long term? You already say I'm not an economist, but maybe you have small comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it all depends on the details, which we don't really have too much. And I think she is aware of that. Again, if she is insisting on spending her way out by, even despite lowering taxes, taking the sort of supply side economics, then that would make investors nervous. So her pragmatism in diplomacy, I'm hoping that she'll show similar pragmatism in terms of economic policies and fiscal policies. Yen hasn't dipped in a way. It's gone well, it hasn't really gone the other way per se, but has regained some of the losses for several over the couple past several months. The stock market is still very high at dizzying levels, if you want to call it that. The bond market, yes, the yield is still high, but it is not as if investors have started dumping JGBs or Japanese government bonds. So again, hopefully, the pragmatism that she has shown so far in terms of diplomacy, foreign policy, can be also replicated in her fiscal policies. Um, so we'll see, but I'm sure the markets are still looking very keenly at the contents of some of her suggestions, like the National Congress in discussing lowering of the consumption tax. So I think it's really about what kind of things she does, what kind of things she says, what the details are going to be about her fiscal policy in general.
Yeah, this is from Louis. Her thoughts on China. It will reduce economic dependence through the. What is it? We asking. This I just bring the same question. Yes, Matilda. U.S.-Japan alliance looks stronger under Takaichi. More defense cooperation in the Pacific could deter threats, but at what cost to regional stability?
It's an interesting question. If Takaichi does carry on with what Abe's policies have been, and all indications are that even Abe's successors until now have pretty much sort of replicated Abe's policies about enhancing strategic partnerships, economic partnerships in the Indo-Pacific region. So most probably it will continue. Would it boost Japan-US alliance? I think Takaichi is one of her priorities to try to do that. But of course, with Trump 2.0, anything goes. So everything is possible. So I think she'll try to maintain Trump's ear, try to sort of keep him in, as it were, in the Indo-Pacific. Again, if she's careful enough not to agitate the Chinese too much in terms of its stability, I think it will remain pretty much as is. Again, it will really depend on what the Chinese themselves think about Taiwan, which is really sort of a more of a domestic Chinese matter as well. But of course, the international and sort of the power balance between US and China is very important. Again, what role Japan might play in that, in disincentivizing, as it were, Chinese to invade that, again, it would really depend on how well Japan can forge partnerships with regional economies to tell the Chinese that throwing them away is far too high a stake for the Chinese to commit at the moment. So I'm hoping that Takaichi will be able to convince partners in the region, and for her to do that, it's really about making sure she keeps her pragmatism, both in terms of economic relations as well as diplomacy in general.
Just there is the last questions. Agnes Mina, the shift in Japan's power balance is a warning to the world. If other Asian nations follow her model, we might see a realignment in global geopolitical thoughts. Will you have any comment? I think the web, maybe social media or the news platforms, maybe painting a different image in outside world than the reality in Japan.
Yes, I think I fully agree, and I think the sort of a narrative of Takaichi provoking China seems to have given the notion that she's hell-bent on changing, altering the balance of power. Again, I don't think that's the case with Takaichi. She does think that maintaining U.S. alliance and alliance commitment is very important. And it's really about how to keep the United States interested in the Indo-Pacific. So again, as a protege of Shinzo Abe, I think the main task for her, is to try to keep the US on board. So it's less about altering the balance of power as it is more about maintaining this balance and not letting it tip in the wrong direction, rather than try to sort of upset the existing balance of power. So for the short term, at least, it looks like it's going to be pretty similar to what we have seen so far. But again, in the longer term, we don't really know, and this will also depend on how Trump reacts as well.
Because in the many news platforms, really sometimes when we saw the news about the result of elections, sometimes they painting, especially some newspapers, they painting the situation is scary. About Japan, that it's about the rising of right wing prime ministers and the issues of the migrations. But now in this show, you tell us different side of the coin. You say there is already an existent reality of the region, and Japan also has a security concern through the Taiwan. But you said, even yeah, you said she following her former leader Shinzo Abe's the policies maybe exactly the same. But what happened to this result, and why now we have different image in outside?
Again, I think it's to do with her domestic policies, her ideology, her conservatism, and some of her social policies. I mean, she is a social conservative, so it's it's understandable how some people might feel. How would that then translate into foreign policy? Now, it's early days of this sort of new mandate, but so far the indications are that she is sounding very pragmatic in terms of its relations, of Japan's relationship with China, in terms of maintaining good relations with the United States, maintaining good relations with South Korea. Nothing, at least at the moment, to indicate that she's really turning away from that. So it's a good indication. Again, in the intermediate to longer term, we don't know. And again, I'm hoping that her ideology doesn't get in the way, that she wants to then push ahead with things like the controversial Yasukuni visit. That would most probably scupper the good relations she has with South Korea. Whether that is in the best interest of Japan at this moment, especially in terms of the rising tensions. And the rising tensions is real. I'm not denying that per se. But having that on the one hand, this tension between Japan and China on the one hand, with what Takaichi might actually do, those are sort of, in a way, there is quite a bit of a disconnect between the two. The reality on the ground, yes, tensions. Does that mean Takaichi is going to keep on provoking China? Again, the earliest indications so far is that she is sounding very pragmatic, and so long as she can maintain that pragmatism, so long as ideology doesn't get in the way, some of her more illiberal um, instincts don't get in the way, then I would think the Japanese government is trying to upset the balance. It's more about trying to maintain, and especially, as is always the case, try to keep the US on board.
No, I think the Taiwan still will be case, as you say. The future we will have some escalation for sure, because given the situation in the East China Sea and South China Sea, and I think we forget to mention the North Korea as well. This is another point. Maybe these things, but sometimes, as we say, the outside image through the news platforms. That's why I always, when I promote my news channel, I told the people and audiences, I say we are different than the headlines, because sometimes the news headlines can give the short, you know just make a title, right wing leaders come to power in Japan, and there is no details at the background, and the conservative come to power. That's why I also just try to make this a chance and invite people to join my channel, and to understand the details very well, because sometimes the similar things happening to China as well. In the other side, when the opposition of China, I saw the similar news on the headline or the social media. But when I invite a scholar from the China or the Chinese scholar, when we go to the details is totally different. We saw the different things.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, and thank you very much, Dr. Taco, for
Thank you very
joining
much
and
for
for
this
your
opportunity.
time and give this insight.
Thank you very much for having me on the program.
You're most welcome, and thank you for my subscribers, my followers, friends. Please keep watching our channel. As you know, we go to the details. We are different than the news headlines, social media. We try to understand the key geopoliticals around the world in a good way, nice way, and contribute to international affairs. Please hit the notification bell as well. Subscribe to channel, and waiting for our upcoming news stream. Have a good day and good holiday.